When time became money, every generation believes it has outsmarted time, that we can bend it, measure it, and make it serve us. We slice it into seconds, price it by the hour, and trade it for a salary, for rent, for interest, for growth. But time was never meant to be sold. It was meant to be lived. Somewhere along the way, we stopped measuring life with time and began measuring time with money. That shift, silent, almost invisible, changed the destiny of every civilization that followed. Because once time became money, every tick of the clock carried a cost. And the faster it ticked, the poorer the future became. Inflation isn't just about rising prices, it's about the erosion of meaning. When the link between work, value, and time begins to blur. It's the moment when saving feels foolish, spending feels urgent, and tomorrow becomes a threat instead of a promise. Every empire experiences this moment. The Romans did when their silver coins thinned, the Byzantines did when their gold lost purity, and we are living through ours right now. Imagine this. You work for a full day, and what you earn today can no longer buy tomorrow what it bought yesterday. Your time, that finite, irreplaceable part of your life, is quietly being devalued, second by second, transaction by transaction. No one steals it. No alarms sound. It simply slips away through a system designed to make you believe that everything's fine. That's the genius of inflation. It doesn't announce itself with violence. It arrives disguised as prosperity, as jobs, as credit, as growth. But beneath the numbers, a hidden trade takes place. Your time for someone else's leverage. You see, time and trust are twins. Money only works because we believe that time spent today will be worth something tomorrow. When that faith breaks, when money starts losing its connection to time, everything else begins to drift. Politics, morality, even identity, they all start to orbit around illusion instead of reality. And that illusion feels comfortable until the clock resets. This isn't new. Every financial age begins with confidence and ends with disbelief. It's the same story written in different centuries. In the 1920s, they called it prosperity. In the 1960s, growth. In the 2010s, liquidity. Different words, same delusion, that time can be printed, borrowed, or bought. But time doesn't obey economics. It obeys decay. When we stretch it beyond its limits, when we spend tomorrow to pay for today, the clock doesn't stop. It just ticks louder. So when we speak of the Great Inflation, we're not just speaking of the 1970s, or of oil shocks and interest rates. We're speaking of something deeper, the moral rhythm of civilization itself. Because inflation isn't just what happens to prices. It's what happens to people when they forget what value means. It's the sound of time losing meaning. Every empire in history has tried to conquer time, to buy it, to borrow it, to postpone the inevitable. And every empire has failed because time can't be owned. It can only be honored. When time became money, the countdown began. The 1970s and the birth of modern inflation. It began quietly, like all fires do. In the 1960s, America was building. Rockets to the moon, wars in the jungle, dreams of prosperity on every television screen. The nation was confident, powerful, unstoppable. But behind the roar of engines and the speeches of presidents, a silent math began to change. The money printed to win hearts and wars was greater than the gold that could back it. And though the numbers still matched on paper, trust, the invisible glue of all economies, had already begun to melt. Inflation doesn't start with prices. It starts with pride, with the belief that power can defy arithmetic, that paper can outlast the truth it represents. By the early 1970s, the illusion cracked. Oil, once cheap and abundant, became the fuse. When OPEC turned off the tap, the entire Western world learned how fragile its comfort was. Gas lines stretched for miles. Mothers skipped groceries to pay heating bills. Factories slowed, salaries shrank, and faith in the system, that wordless religion of modern life, began to falter. From 1973 to 1981, inflation climbed beyond 10%. Savings dissolved. The dollar, once as good as gold, became just another promise. And like all promises in history, it began to lose weight. They called it the Great Inflation. But in truth, it was something older. The return of a pattern every empire eventually rediscovers. For centuries, the Roman emperors mixed silver with tin. In the 20th century, leaders mixed money with politics. Different metals, same motive. The idea that if you print enough, you can postpone the reckoning. But the clock was already ticking louder. Interest rates soared above 20%. Mortgage payments doubled. Entire generations learned to fear the word inflation. It wasn't just about money, it was about memory. Because when people watch their savings vanish, they begin to question everything: governments, markets, the future itself. And that's how societies change. Not through revolutions, but through silent disillusionment. But even within chaos, there are architects of order. One man, Paul Volcker, stepped into history with a single weapon: pain. He raised interest rates so high that the economy screamed. Businesses collapsed, unemployment soared. But something else happened too. Trust returned. Because pain, unlike promises, is real. When inflation finally broke, the United States emerged into a new age, one obsessed not with money itself, but with controlling it. Central banks became the new emperors, and their creed was simple: never let the fire burn again. Yet every fire leaves a trace. The 1970s changed how the world thinks about value and about time. People stopped saving and started investing. They learned to chase returns, not security. And the economy became addicted, not to growth, but to speed. What had once been a clock of patience turned into a race against time itself. The age of fire never truly ended. It just moved inside us. Now we burn hours instead of fuel. We inflate our expectations instead of our currency. We buy faster, build faster, collapse faster. And every time the clock strikes, we tell ourselves it's different. That this time, technology will save us. That data can rewrite destiny. But history only smiles, because it has seen this before. Inflation isn't a number on a chart. It's the sound of time catching up. The price we pay for forgetting that patience is value. And that nothing real can grow under the illusion of endless credit. The 1970s were not a failure. They were a reminder that when nations stretch time to buy comfort, time always collects the debt. Every fire begins as warmth until it forgets what burns. In a world built on noise, silence is the real signal. If you found meaning here, don't let it fade. Like, subscribe, and stay with us as we keep decoding the truths money can't buy. The price of forgetting: when the fire finally cooled, the world sighed in relief. Inflation, that word of fear and fury, had been tamed. The 1980s ended with pain, but the pain brought order, and order brought confidence. By the 1990s, economists called it the Great Moderation. They said the business cycle was conquered, that recessions were temporary, and that central banks had learned the secret to eternal growth. The fire was out. The world was safe, or so it seemed. But comfort is the most dangerous form of forgetfulness. It arrives quietly, wearing the mask of progress. Interest rates fell, debt became cheaper. Technology accelerated everything: communication, trade, wealth, illusion. Money felt infinite, and with it, time. People no longer saved. They speculated. They borrowed tomorrow to decorate today. The same clock that once ticked with discipline now pulsed like a heartbeat. Fast, excited, reckless. The generation that once feared inflation gave birth to one that had never seen it. And that's how history resets. Not through ignorance, but through innocence. The 1990s became an era of paper prosperity. The dot-com boom. The promise of endless innovation. Every startup, every stock, every slogan whispered the same lie. This time, it's different. Markets soared, the poor invested, the rich borrowed, and the cycle, ancient as Rome, began again, only this time wrapped in silicon and optimism. When the bubble burst in 2000, the world barely blinked. The lesson was learned, then ignored. Because forgetting isn't an accident, it's a feature of comfort. The 2008 crisis should have been another reckoning. Banks collapsed. Fortunes evaporated. Millions lost their homes. And yet, the response was the same as it had always been. Print more, borrow more, believe more. Only this time, it wasn't governments debasing gold or silver. It was central banks debasing reality. Zero interest rates, quantitative easing, stimulus. $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. No empire had ever created so much money with so little outrage. Because by then, the clock had changed again. The new generation didn't fear inflation. They feared stagnation. They wanted growth at any cost. And so time was borrowed once more. Debt became wealth. Bubbles became policies. And every crisis became a reason to repeat the same cure. What was once printing money became monetary innovation. And like every euphemism in history, it hid the same truth. We had learned nothing. There's a strange psychology to forgetting. When you forget a pain, you repeat it. When you forget a loss, you invite it back. In finance, forgetting isn't emotional. It's systemic. It's built into the design. Every generation starts from zero, believing they've invented wisdom, when all they've done is rename greed. The Great Moderation wasn't a victory. It was an intermission, a pause between fires. And while economists wrote papers and traders wrote algorithms, the spark was already waiting, hidden in cheap credit and human pride. The price of forgetting isn't measured in money. It's measured in meaning. Because when value becomes virtual and risk becomes normal, people lose the ability to tell the difference between wealth and illusion. Every skyscraper built on debt is a monument to memory loss. Every generation that says it's different this time is simply lighting the same fuse again. When you forget the lessons of pain, you don't erase them. You just defer them to your children. And one day when they look back, they'll see what every civilization sees before it falls. That prosperity without discipline is only anesthesia. The 1990s believed time could be digitized. The 2000s believed debt could be mastered. The 2010s believed data could replace judgment. But the 2020s will learn what the 1970s once knew. You can't defeat the clock. You can only respect it. The cost of forgetting is always paid in the next cycle. The age of fiat. When trust became currency, every civilization needs a foundation. For centuries, ours was gold. A promise measured in metal, a truth you could touch. But in 1971, that foundation cracked. A single decision, technical, temporary, televised, turned money from something you could hold into something you must believe. From that moment on, trust itself became the currency. It was called fiat money, Latin for let it be, as if value could be spoken into existence. No gold, no silver, just faith, printed, digitized, and multiplied across ledgers and screens. Governments no longer needed to earn wealth, they could declare it. And the people, for lack of alternatives, accepted it. The modern era of economics began not with innovation, but with imagination. The belief that paper could outlive its promise. The first years were quiet. The world didn't collapse. Markets adjusted. Oil prices rose, currencies floated, and humanity learned a new kind of freedom, the freedom to borrow. Debt was no longer a burden. It was oxygen. Governments borrowed to stimulate. Corporations borrowed to expand. Families borrowed to belong. The age of fiat was the age of access, a miracle built on nothing but permission. But permission has a cost, because when everything can be created, nothing feels real. Money lost its weight, value lost its roots, and humans, untethered from limits, forgot that scarcity is what gives meaning. Soon, economists spoke of soft landings, politicians promised infinite growth, and central banks became priests of a new religion, the worship of perpetual expansion. Every problem could be solved with liquidity, every failure forgiven with credit, every lesson delayed with stimulus. And slowly, the line between wealth and wish disappeared. Then came the paradox. If everyone can print value, who decides what value means? The dollar, once backed by gold, was now backed by military power, network dominance, and inertia. Trust was no longer earned, it was enforced. Nations that questioned it were cut off from trade. Banks that hesitated were replaced by code. And citizens who doubted were told to keep consuming. This was the new empire, an empire of belief, where compliance replaced collateral. Narrator, quieter, contemplative tone. Yet for all its complexity, the system remained simple in spirit. Keep the machine running. As long as prices rose slowly, as long as people kept spending, the illusion held. We didn't need gold. We didn't need restraint. We needed confidence. And confidence, like any bubble, thrives on silence. But trust is not infinite. It wears down, not in collapse, but in fatigue. When a system asks you to believe forever, eventually, you stop asking why. You just obey. You invest in indexes you don't understand. You accept inflation you don't question. You measure life not in hours, but in yields. And one day, without knowing when, you realize the clock stopped ticking because time itself was borrowed. Every empire that abandons restraint eventually mistakes belief for truth. Rome diluted its silver, Byzantium its gold, and we diluted reality itself. When a number on a screen replaces the sweat of labor, wealth becomes an abstraction. An abstraction has no mercy. It expands until it consumes meaning, then collapses under its own faith. Narrator, closing tone, quiet but weighted. Fiat currency gave us abundance, but abundance made us forget the cost of creation. Now, when governments talk of stimulus, they are not printing money. They are printing time. Time borrowed from the future, time that someone must repay. And as history has shown, that repayment never comes from the powerful. It comes from those who believed longest. The age of fiat taught us that trust can be engineered, but not forever. It can stretch, but not without breaking. And when it breaks, the same question returns, the one every empire must face before it falls. What is money? When belief runs out. When gold vanished, the truth didn't die. It just waited for belief to fail again. The Great Reset of trust. Inflation always ends the same way, not with hyper prices, but with hyper promises. We start by printing money, then we print faith, then we print time, and eventually we run out of all three. The 2020s were not the end of inflation. They were its evolution, an era where belief became the last commodity still in circulation. When sanctions froze billions overnight, the world learned a simple truth. What's yours isn't really yours if someone else controls the ledger. So nations turned inward. Vaults reopened. Gold, once dismissed as ancient superstition, became the quiet language of sovereignty again. By 2025, central banks had purchased more gold than in any year since the Cold War. They weren't speculating, they were hedging against memory loss, because history had shown them that inflation isn't a number, it's a symptom of forgetting what gives money its meaning. Every empire faces the same disease, confusing abundance with prosperity. Rome debased silver. Byzantium diluted gold. We diluted truth. In the 20th century, we inflated money. In the 21st, we inflated narratives. Each new crisis came with a new justification: temporary, transitory, managed. But inflation, in its purest form, isn't about prices. It's about the erosion of honesty. The lie that we can consume without producing, borrow without repaying, believe without questioning. While the West borrowed time, the East bought weight. China, India, and Russia began trading not in promises, but in physical settlement, a quiet revolution hidden under diplomacy. The global order that once ran on credit is now rediscovering collateral. Call it BRICS. Call it de-dollarization. Call it what it really is, a return to discipline. Every ounce of gold stored in a vault is a vote of no confidence in paper empires. Every deal signed in local currency is a rebellion against the inflation of trust. We used to fear inflation because it destroyed savings. Now we fear deflation because it destroys illusion. The pendulum has swung so far that stability itself feels dangerous. In the 1970s, we asked how much a dollar could buy. Today, we ask how long it can exist. And beneath that question lies the next cycle, the one no chart can measure, the spiritual inflation of modern life. When everything can be printed, what still has weight? When everyone can create truth, what still feels real? When time itself can be borrowed, what's left to believe in? Every inflation is a confession that we wanted too much, too fast. Economics only describes the mechanism. Psychology explains the cause. Inflation begins when memory fades, when the lessons of restraint are replaced by the comfort of convenience. It ends when people rediscover pain, the most honest teacher of all. Gold doesn't rise because it changes. It rises because we don't. History never repeats, but it always rhymes in decimals and despair. Every 50 years, the world forgets that value must be earned, not declared. And each time it forgets, it rebuilds the same illusion, stronger, smarter, yet just as fragile. The Great Inflation wasn't just about prices, it was about memory, and how easily we trade it for comfort, for credit, for calm. When the next cycle begins, and it already has, the chart will not measure CPI. It will measure confidence. We can build new systems, mint new coins, print new dreams, but no civilization has ever escaped the weight of what it forgets. Because the opposite of inflation isn't deflation, it's remembrance. The Great Inflation never ended. It just changed its name.